welcome to the Transformational Podcast, a conversation between brothers about practical ways faith is impacting our lives. We invite you to join us on this journey as we are learning to let faith transform the way we live. We are glad you are with us today and look forward to sharing our journey with you. Now let's jump in.
Well, Robert, why don't you kick us off since I struggled so much last week?
Yeah, exactly. Well, welcome to the Transformational, Chris, the Transformational Podcast. It is absolutely good to be back on. You should subscribe to that. You should hit the like. You should leave us a review. I mean, if you haven't done that, Chris, geez Louise. You've got the pastor from Paradise, Chris, and the Marine from Maryland, myself, Robert, here in Maryland. And it's been an interesting week, Chris. And of course, I would be remiss to say that it was probably the funniest part of getting ready for this podcast was you messaging the family that you're podcasting. But
we were praying and talking. We're praying right before this, and they're playing with the dog in there, and he's barking. I'm like, all right, guys, all right.
Yeah, but I think our friends. I mean, I'm going to go on a limb and say I think they like a little bit of the rawness or the realness of that part of the podcast. So hopefully, as long as the dog's not like incessantly barking, it's.
I think it'll be all right.
I was going to say, I think it's nice to know that you have a great family that's out there playing with the dog and doing out.
And we've got a great 1-year-old German Shepherd. If anyone would like to take him for a while, or he's a great companion.
Handful.
He's a great dog.
Well, good, man. Well, how was your week? How was your day? What's up with you?
So a couple things. Do you remember last year? Oh my gosh. I can hardly tell the story without laughing. Last year at Valentine's Day, before we did buy this dog, do you remember the card that I got my wife?
I don't. I know you're going to tell me. And even if I did remember, you still have to tell the story. People, people need to know.
Okay, so here's the thing, guys. The boys our dog had passed away tragically. It was horrible. Terrible deal. I wasn't ready for a dog. I was like, man, that was the roughest thing I've ever walked through with an animal. So Julie's asking for another dog. She's looking up German Shepherds, finding them. And then she gets the boys involved, and they're promising to do all the work and help and all the things that I know.
Sure they
are. And I told them, hey, at that time we weren't in a house. We were staying with my in-laws. And I said, hey guys, here's the thing. We need a house before we have a dog. And so anyway, I kind of put my foot down a little bit. Well, I was looking for a Valentine's Day card last year.
Okay.
And I found one that said, I knew for Valentine's Day, you would love puppies. So you open it up and said, I got you a card full of puppies, and it was tons of puppies, like pictures of puppies. Happy Valentine's Day. All right, Robert, I thought that card was hilarious. So I gave it to her.
Oh, man.
She didn't think it was as funny at the time as maybe I did. But here's what's crazy.
I think you got in trouble.
Well, she did obviously think it was somewhat funny because every year she puts together a calendar that has pictures from the previous year in it. And it's a family calendar for the month of February. February, in the middle of the picture collage, was the card. And I was like, see, it was funny. It was awesome. And so
I told you it was hilarious.
I know. I don't know why you didn't think it was so funny. So that was pretty funny. And then one other thing, Robert, that I did this week that I've never done this before. It was so cool. We had a marriage conference. That's why we're just now recording on Saturday night instead of this morning.
Is that the one thing you did this week you've never done before, a marriage conference?
No. We've done a couple of those.
I know. I'm joking.
But we had one there at the church, and they wanted me to open it and do a welcome and introduce the host for the weekend and stuff like that. And I was like, sure, of course. They're like, do you think Julie would do it with you? And I'm like, sure, of course. Which is hilarious because
you didn't ask, I'm sure.
I didn't fully ask or even partially ask. So you're right.
Okay.
So so Friday, I'm like, hey, doing the welcome. I need you to come up there and do it with me. She's like, what? Well, do I have to say anything? I was like, just a couple things, not anything big. Like, it's going to be simple. She's like, well, you have to tell me what I'm supposed to say at least, and I think she gave me a time frame of 2 hours before. Maybe she said 3. I don't remember. But on Friday, I was working on the garage, doing all the things in the garage. And I come in, she's like, you have 7 minutes and you still have till the deadline to tell me what I have to say. So I came into the office. I know, dude. I came into the office and I'm like, what do I do? So I start thinking through it. And then I got on Gemini, AI.
Okay.
And so I said,
Yeah.
I need a script. This is what I wrote, actually. I need a script for a pastor and his wife to do a welcome for a marriage conference at Grace Fellowship. The conference is called, and I gave the name. The pastor is Chris and his wife is Julie. It needs to include a welcome, explanation of using a QR code with access to a schedule, information for the event, introduction to Aaron and Candy, who would be the event host. I'd like for it to include the part of the vision and blah, blah, blah. So I literally just say all these things. And it says, absolutely. Here's a script for Pastor Chris and Julie to welcome attendees to the XL Marriage Conference at Grace Fellowship. Bro, I hit print and I walked it out there 1 minute to spare before the whatever deadline she had. She looked at it. She was like, are you serious? And she was like, this is a lot more. I was like, no, it's not that much. Just let's read through it, whatever. Bro, it was awesome. It was better than anything I could have written. And so, I guess what it does tell me
my goodness.
is that artificial intelligence is more intelligent than me, Robert. And that's the end of the story.
Those large language models are impressive, but I mean, my goodness.
Anyway,
hey man, I'm not even hating it. No, that's cool.
Yeah.
Now you've got me thinking, I'm like, what should I use this for?
Robert, I'm telling you, there was one time I had a lot of information to convey. This is actually where it started. Had a lot of information to convey to my board, a lot of financial details, and they weren't all related. So there's like several different things. And so I was trying to figure out, how do I make this as clear as possible? I need to get them to them efficiently and effectively. And so I wrote the email and I got done. It was so long. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so much. Is it even clear? So I put it in Gemini and I was just like, I saw an ad commercial for this. I was like,
right.
So I put it in Gemini. I said, hey, Gemini, how would you change this to make this more clear and concise? And said, well, I would do this, this, and this. And I was like, well, can you do that for me? Of course. And then he basically rewrote my email with all the details in a much more clear and concise way. And I was like, oh my gosh. So I copied and pasted it and hit send. And I told him later, I was like, hey, that email, I did not write that. I know you probably thought, man, this guy's brilliant. It was not me.
Yeah. So, well, I got a few people that I work with that need to use that Gemini thing that you're using to shorten their emails up.
Dude, it was so great.
I actually called a friend of mine.
I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. I called a friend of mine last week to make fun of somebody who was writing a 3-page email. And I was like, you need to go over there and tell him to like shorten it up. Like Mark Twain said, I would have made it shorter if I had more time. I said, tell him to take more time. Like his emails are too long. Anyway,
copy and paste to Gemini. It'll shorten it for you. I'm telling you. This is not an ad for Gemini. We are not sponsored.
I wish. However, we'd be getting money right now.
I
know. So you had a good marriage conference and lots of folks attended. That's awesome. This week I went down to New Bern to visit some of my team down there. It was really cool to be back in New Bern. New Bern is where I spent, I don't know, man, we spent probably 6 years there, doing fleet work when I was doing that time frame. It was beautiful. As I woke up in the morning, the sun comes up right over the bay where I was at in the park. And at one point you get the mirror image where the sky has got the beautiful clouds and everything, but the lake has it or not the lake, the bay has it as well. It was incredible. So anyway, that was that. I got up with some friends, spent a lot of time, honestly, talking, managed, I don't know. I may have missed the flu on that trip, but we got one in the house now. So I'm still trying to dodge and weave or bob and weave and trying to get out of it. Let's not go too long, if you don't mind.
No.
As I think we have a chance
I had
to.
lots of stories, dude. I had a lot of stories.
No, it's
That's my bad.
okay. But we got a really good one tonight, because we're going to get
One of
into
my
Hebrews
favorite.
11:32.
Yeah.
That's right. And it says, "How much do I need to say? It would take too long to recount the stories of faith, of the faith of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and all the prophets." So I think, Chris, we're committed. We're going to do them one at a time, because they're good. And, Gideon being a really good one to take a look at. And Gideon starts in Judges 6, for those who follow along. In Judges 6, in the book of Judges, what we have is the Israelites, who essentially, just as a recap to kind of get us caught up to speed, they don't have a king, so they have judges that God brings in and more or less leads the people against some of the evil nations around them. And then the Israelites, they do bad. They basically stray from the Lord. And then God brings in another judge, and he delivers them as they cry out to him. And so it kind of starts in Judges 6. The Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight, so the Lord handed them over to the Midianites for 7 years. That is a pattern that you see all through Judges. Yep. They do evil, they get handed over, then the Lord rescues them or pulls them out. He delivers them. And so essentially, this was so bad at this point in Judges 6:6, because the Midianites came in and they called them the enemy hordes. They literally were eating everything. And so Israel was reduced to starvation by the Midianites. Then the Israelites cried out to the Lord for help. When they cried out to the Lord because of Midian, the Lord sent a prophet to Israel. He said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you out of slavery in Egypt. I rescued you from the Egyptians and from all who oppressed you. I drove out your enemies and gave you their land. I told you, I am the Lord your God. You must not worship the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you now live, but you didn't listen to me." So basically, God's saying, hey, you brought this on yourself. Mm-hmm. And so enter Gideon in verse 11. It says, "Then the angel of the Lord came and sat beneath the great tree at Ophrah," which maybe that's Oprah's name, Anyway, "which belonged to Joash, the clan of Abiezer. Gideon, son of Joash, was threshing wheat at the bottom of a winepress to hide the grain from the Midianites." In other words, he's hiding out at the bottom of a wine grain, trying to thresh wheat. You normally do that out in the open because you're trying to get all the shuck and stuff get out of there, or whatever, all the trash wheat out. "The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said," you want to take it from here?
Go ahead, because I was actually looking up something that I wanted to share about this that I remembered. But I'll point out that he's hiding there. Really, he's hiding in fear is what he's doing. He's trying to get food. They're just trying to survive. And so he's in the bottom of a wine press, really doing everything the hard way because
and the angel of the Lord is the angel of the Lord is a phrase in the Old Testament that refers to God himself. Now, a lot of folks would offer that may be pre-incarnate Jesus. In other words, perhaps it's God, but not in Jesus form, so to say. But anyway, he is considered God. So the angel of the Lord came and appeared to him and said, "Mighty hero, the Lord is with you." I love Gideon's reply.
Yeah.
Yes. Sir, if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? And where are all the miracles our ancestors told us about? Didn't they say the Lord brought us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and handed us over to the Midianites. Then the Lord turned to him and said, "Go with the strength you have and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I'm sending you." Gideon, I love him, man. So raw, so real. "Lord, how can I rescue Israel? My clan is the weakest in the whole tribe of Manasseh. And I am the least. I'm the least in my entire family."
Well, and Robert, if you remember, and I think this is the part that I love about the story, it was when we've talked about identity before, one of the things we talk about is, what does God call him?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. That's why I was like, hey, you want to take it from here? Because he calls him mighty hero.
Yes, he calls him mighty hero, right? Well, another version is mighty man of valor. That's
How
another
cool is that? What a
translation.
great,
That is
what a,
cool. I like that translation better.
I know. And like that, like, he sees himself as the weakest in the whole tribe of Manasseh.
That's it. Yep.
And God just enters the scene and he's like, hey, mighty man of valor.
Yeah.
Gideon did one of these. He did one of these. Ready, Chris? He looks behind him,
Yeah.
Who are you
You
talking
talking to
to?
me? Yeah. Now here's what's crazy when he says mighty hero, it's mighty one, physically powerful. So he replies with, what are you talking about? I'm weak. And God's saying, he's saying, I don't see you for where you currently are.
That's not what I
I
called you.
I see you for who I made you to be. And I
Man.
think that to me is such a beautiful picture of the way God looks at us. And also considering, once again, this is a man who made it into the hall of faith. He didn't get off to the greatest start in his own mind. And I think it's great because we'll see that what made him great was not where he came from or even where God found him. God found him at the bottom of a wine press, uh, you know, trying to get the wheat from the whatever that's called, the chaff, right? He's trying to
Yeah.
get those
In the
things
chat. Yep.
separated. And so Gideon self-describes himself as the least. Here's what I love. God often uses the unlikely. And not just unlikely to
Yeah.
everyone else. It was unlikely to him. He didn't see himself that way. Um, he felt unqualified, unaccomplished, right? And not only that, he calls him a mighty man, and he finds him while he's in hiding. He's going, man, I'm not trying to fight a war. I'm just trying to get some food. So I love that start because this is a guy who makes the hall of faith, and God used the unlikely. He finds him in a place where he feels completely inequipped,
Yeah.
ill-equipped, and
Oh yeah.
unlikely to be who God called him to be.
I know. Yeah. So what ends up happening is Gideon's like, hey, and I'm going to sort of brush over some of this because Gideon says essentially, all right, well, if you're really going to be with me and it's really the Lord speaking to me, don't go anywhere. I'm going to bring you back an offering. And so the angel of the Lord's like, hey, I'm not going anywhere. So Gideon went out. He got a goat and some flour, and he brought him back some food. And the angel of God now said to him, place the meat on that and the unleavened bread on that rock and pour the broth over it. In other words, he said, hey, put my meal over there on that rock because the angel of the Lord's about to do something. Go ahead. I thought you were about to say
Sorry,
something.
I was catching up. There was one other point before we got there.
Okay,
I'm
go
sorry,
because
verse
we can come
14.
back. We can come
Yeah,
back to the
verse
food.
verse 14. He says, "Go with the strength you have and rescue
Yeah,
Israel."
that's a good point.
I'm saying Gideon was focused on what he didn't have. God
Mm-hmm.
says, I don't need what you don't have. I've got that. I need you just to be willing to use the strength that you do have. With whatever, it doesn't matter. Go with the strength that you have.
Think about that for a second.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, if you're there's sometimes in normal life, as I like to call it, right, where you are like God's calling you to do something or whatever, and you're like, God, I don't have the strength to do anything. And God's not like He's not asking you to have the strength to do it. He's asking you to go with the strength that you currently have, trusting that He will be with you in it.
Yeah. Yep.
It's kind of
Yeah,
interesting.
I love it. He's going, I'm not asking you to have the plan or the power. I'm asking you to be willing, right? It
Yeah,
comes back to that we talk about all the time. It's about a willing heart. Just
it
go with the
is.
strength you have. So go ahead. Sorry. I knew there was another point that I was meaning to make
No.
and I
Yeah,
missed
because
it.
God
So
does say He's going to be with him and He's going to destroy the Midianites as if they were fighting against one man, which that's actually
yes.
interesting as well, because
Yep.
that's not at all. Those Midianite hordes is what they call them. So,
Yep.
anyway, he has this meal, puts it on a rock. Then the angel of the Lord touched the meat and the bread with the tip of his staff, and fire flamed up from the rock and consumed all he had brought. And the angel of the Lord
Come on, man.
disappeared. I know. And the
Come
angel of
on.
the Lord disappeared. Like,
Yeah.
of course, what does Gideon
Yeah.
say? Oh, sovereign Lord, I am doomed. I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. Now, this is really interesting to me, right? Because the angel of the Lord disappeared. Gideon says that, and the Lord replies to him. So it just kind of tells you that now Gideon is having not a face-to-face conversation, but he's having a conversation.
He's listening to God. God's speaking to him. God speaks to people, and I think that's important for us to know. Yeah.
And the Lord says, hey, it's all right. Don't be afraid. You will not die. And then Gideon did some stuff. And so that night, the Lord told Gideon what he needed to do. He needed to basically go and take down all of the Asherah poles, basically these satanic forms of worship. And he's about to create a stir in his village. But that's really not necessarily what we're going to get into, because now Gideon is going to ask for a sign.
Yeah.
Now he's met with the angel of the Lord. He's watched the food go up from a rock, and God's called him out, mighty man of valor. And now he's like, I think I need a sign.
Yeah. Now, before the sign, though, I know you just say what he's about to do. I think it's important, just verse 25, where it says that not the Lord said to Gideon, take the second bull from your father's herd, the one that is 7 years old. Isn't that interesting? He's like being very descriptive here. He says, but then he says, pull down your father's altar to Baal and cut down the Asherah pole standing beside it. That's false gods, false worship.
He's calling him to get rid of the false gods in his life.
Right.
He's telling him, make a stand. As for me and my house today, we serve the Lord.
And once again, I just, the reason I point that out is because he's not following a godly example. God's calling him out from his own past, from his own upbringing, and saying, hey, it's time for you to break with the past and begin the new. He says, tear those things down, and in their place, I want you to build an altar to the one true God.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly what he's doing. God calls us to do the same thing, right? He tells us a lot of times to do the exact same thing.
Yeah, then sacrifice the bull as a burnt offering. Your father's second bull, sacrifice that one. So I thought that was interesting.
No, it is funny, and it does rile the people up, and they come out, and his father does actually stand up for him. Joash actually gets into him and it's like, why are you defending Baal? Why are you arguing this? Basically, why are you arguing the case of this false god? And so anyway, fascinating.
Yep. So
all right, you want to get into the sign that I find. So I think, to me, in aggregate, this is an interesting part of it, because I would not have expected to see a sign here.
Well, wait a minute.
A need for a sign.
Yeah.
All right, go.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Dude,
there's parts of the story
backing us up tonight.
There's great story here. So it says early. I will jump faster here in just a second. But the next morning, all the people of the town begin to wake up and see that someone had torn down the altar, and basically the people said to each other, "Who did this?" Asking around, and learned it was Gideon, the son of Joash, and they go and say, "Bring out your son. He must die for destroying the altar cut down." And Joash shouted to them all, "Why are you defending Baal? Will you argue his case? Why are you arguing for him? Will you defend him? Whoever pleads his case will be put to death by morning." He says, "But if Baal is truly is a god, let him defend himself and destroy the one who broke the altar." From then on, Gideon was called Jerubbaal, which means let Baal defend himself. I love that. He went from, I'm the weakest in the clan, I'm the least known from the weakest clan, smallest family, to let this false god that these people worship, let him defend himself. Isn't that great?
It's a perfect act of defiance, right?
Yes. It's a change. It's a change in the way that he is seen in the story, right?
Yep, absolutely.
So now we get to the sign, and Robert, I don't know why you're slowing us down, but we've got to move forward with this. So.
I love it. Hey, no, that's all right. We won't let you back this one up, because I don't know. There's not really anywhere to back it up. This whole part of the story is something that kind of cracks me up, because after the armies, that goes into verse 33, it says, soon after the armies of Midian, Amalek, and the people of the east formed an alliance against Israel and crossed the Jordan, camping in the valley of Jezreel. So, Chris, there are I don't know, a metric butt ton of people here. That's really that's the way you can read this.
Yeah. That's an army term.
Yeah, exactly. It is. And then, not a Marine term, man. That kind of hurt my feelings.
Sorry, I meant a military term. A military term. That's what I meant.
Okay. Anyway, verse 34 says, "The Spirit of the Lord clothed Gideon with power. He blew a ram's horn as a call to arms, and the men of the clan of Abiezer came to him. He also sent messages throughout Manasseh, Asher, Zebulun, Naphtali, summoning their warriors, and all of them responded." So he sent basically messages out, but I love this part. It says, "The Spirit of the Lord clothed Gideon with power."
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be nice to be clothed with the power of the Lord?
That's it like that in and of itself. What does that look like, right?
Yeah, I know, right?
He like Hulk out all of a sudden.
But, tell you
what, but I think the power there is probably not just external. I mean, I wouldn't even believe that as an external power, but an internal power, right?
Absolutely.
It's the same power that we see in Acts when it says, "And you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes."
That's right.
And you'll be my witnesses throughout Judea, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. What is the power? It's the Holy Spirit's power. It's the power of God in us, that he was encouraged. Meaning courage was infused inside of him by the power of God. Now, here's why I also find this interesting, is that his name becomes "Let Baal defend himself" after he tore down all this. And suddenly these armies start coming against him. Now, in their culture, they would have likely tied those two things together, that we were worshiping Baal, we're doing these things, and we didn't have armies coming against us. Then this guy tore it down. And this is Baal's judgment on us. I mean, Robert, this was really the way yes, this is really the way their culture saw things. And so it's interesting that it says, man, they start coming, and instead of being fearful and running, God clothes them with power, with with God's power, the Spirit's power.
Yeah. Now, and then this part always intrigues me, right? So he's clothed with power. He's had an actual physical encounter with the Lord of God's army, or whatever this is. Sorry, I gotta go back.
The angel of the Lord.
Thank you. I was I am missing my words there. Anyway, and then I don't know, is this doubt? Because he says to God, "If you're truly going to rescue us from Israel, as you promised, prove it to me in this way." And so he puts this wolf fleece out.
Not from Israel. Rescue Israel from them.
Oh, yeah.
But go ahead.
Rescue
go ahead.
Israel as you promised. There we go. "I'm going to put this fleece on the threshing floor tonight. If the fleece is wet in the morning, but the ground's dry, then I know you're going to help us out." And so that's what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was able to wring out an entire, bowl full of water from the fleece. And then he looks at God and says, "Don't be angry with me." This literally is in the text, folks. I'm not making this up. This sounds like it's me making something up. It's not. Gideon said to God, "Please don't be angry with me, but let me make one more request. Let me use the fleece for one more test. This time, let the fleece remain dry while the ground around it is wet with dew." And so that night, God did as Gideon asked, and the fleece was dry in the morning, but the ground was covered with dew. I think it's interesting, Chris, because even after those two big encounters, being clothed with power, the Spirit of the Lord clothing Gideon with power, he still felt the need to set out a fleece. A lot of people talk about putting out a fleece, and as a way of knowing God's going to do something for him or whatever. But he did it twice, not just once. Yep. I think that's interesting. I don't think I'd fully understand what was going on with Gideon at this point. If he was doing this out of fear, if he was doing this out of confirmation because he didn't have a prophet at the time to tell him to do one thing or another, or what, or God wasn't talking to him in the same way he did before. And so this was kind of Gideon's way of, saying, "Is this the moment you want me to engage?" Which that maybe that's part of it. I've always kind of wondered here. I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
A couple of things. I do think it's interesting that he's listed in the heroes of faith, right? And he's a guy who's maybe seeking this sign as just going, all right, I just need confirmation. But I also think it's shows God's patience with us when we
need a little help moving along.
Right. Well, and maybe not even, I'm not sure he was looking for a way out. I think he was actually looking for a way in, meaning, God, I want to make sure this isn't just me. And the reason I say that is that sometimes when we begin talking to God and listening to God, when you're about to make a drastic decision that affects more than just you, I don't think God like gets angry with you and go, okay, God, I need to know that this is you that's telling me this and not just me. I hear that all the time is, how do you know when it's God or and how do you know when it's you? And I think it's okay to be like, God, will you confirm this? And he does that with my wife. He does that in scripture. He does that sometimes. Now, I think sometimes that confirmation, like it's confirmation bias. We're just looking for anything to confirm it. And so we can get our line. But this is not bias confirmation, right? He's going, all right, God, this is something that wouldn't happen if you didn't do it. So, will you just confirm that's what's going on? Because he's not really using the fleece to discover his will. It's more or less just asking for confirmation or assurance that this is what God is asking him to do.
I think it's interesting to your point, Chris, is that it's not that he's impacting just himself at this point, because he had 22,000. We'll find out in the next chapter 7. He had 22,000 people who were left, went home, and then only 10,000 were left. So, I mean, he had like 32,000 people show up to fight. And so he probably had a sense of responsibility and wanted to make sure that this was the moment to engage. And so that may have been a part of it. You've actually had a few times where I know that you had asked, like, Lord, give me clarity in this moment, and do this by essentially having Julie, ask me to do something or bring something up. And I don't know if you can remember any of those stories come directly
Robert,
to mind. But
one that just jumps off the page is when we entered into this giving initiative that we've been in for a couple years at Grace, to just because God is advancing the mission of Grace here at His church, and part of that is we got to make more room for those God's put us here to reach. I mean, God is bringing more and more people, but that being said, we need more space for ministry, and so what does that take? It takes His people saying, "Man, I want to be a part of that. I want to help advance the mission." So, as the leader, I was like, all right, Lord, you got to show me and tell me. And I prayed. I had a number that I was like, holy smokes. Now, I was nervous about even the number, but I was nervous about even saying it out loud to Julie. So I was like, Julie, you just pray about it. You just talk about it, and we'll talk about it when you come, whatever. And Robert, we pushed it down the road a bit because I was nervous to say my number out loud, and I was waiting for her to feel confident, and she was kind of going back and forth. I think she felt like she heard a number, but then she also felt the same way. And so we're driving down the road. I said, all right, I just need you just to say the number. And she said it, and I died laughing. Or she said, "This is going to sound crazy, and if it's nowhere close, it's okay. It's just I can't get away from this number." And she said it, and I died laughing. I was like, "Jules, that was the first number that God brought to mind, and it's literally the only number that I've tried to talk myself into other numbers, and I feel like God goes to this. Now, here's the thing: it was one of those deals financially that were like, I have no clue how we're going to do this. This doesn't make sense on paper." And then God, that next year, as we started doing it, and said, all right, we're just going to do everything we can, knowing that God's going to have to do something along the way to make it possible. God did something along the way that made it possible and out of the blue. And then the next year, we relaunched because we needed to get a little more momentum to try to get to phase 2, because really things had grown. God was growing His church so much faster than anyone could have imagined or expected.
Yeah.
It was like, all right, so we relaunched and we made a new commitment. And once again, I was like, I have no clue, but it was very clear. Once again, I prayed about it. She prayed about it. We talked about it. It was like, that's it. Here we go. And Robert, like, there have just been things along the way that you look up and go, yeah, this is God's provision, because we were willing to say, yes, we'll do this. And it was just one of those deals, but it was a confirmation, my wife and I, of, and Robert, here's the deal. If we'd had different numbers, here's what we'd have done. We go, hey, God hasn't made it clear yet. Let's go back and pray.
Yeah.
And be open-handed with it.
Yeah, and here's another way to kind of see it, because I have many things that are popping around in my head on ways that it's happened with me. And one of the ways it happened once was when I was, when was it? Maybe we'll use the one where God called me to test pilot school the first time, and um, I'm out at a training exercise out in the middle of Wyoming, Guernsey, Wyoming. You look it up on a map; it's really small. And some guy looks at me and says, "Hey, have you ever thought about being a test pilot?" And much like Gideon, right? Much like Gideon, I did one of those like look behind me moments and then look back at him, and I'm like, "Are you talking to me?" um, and he was, yeah, you're smart and blah 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 blah. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I was like, I'm an idiot. Like, I just work hard. And I dismissed it, Chris. And then
Yeah.
2 days later, a best friend of mine who was a prayer partner of mine in college, he emailed me and he says, oh yeah, hey, I'm just finishing up test pilot school. I had never heard of test pilot school ever. Like, it's not even never crossed my mind. And then 2 weeks later, I eat lunch with one of Hillary's um, best friends from high school, and he married this guy who's a Navy guy. I kind of knew him, but didn't really know him. I'm like, hey, Keith, what's up with you? What are you doing these days? He's like, well, I'm about halfway through test pilot school.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, Lord, I hear you.
There it is.
I mean? I hear
there
you.
it is.
I hear you.
Yep.
And
There it is.
I like to bring that story to mind, because you have that very specific moment where you said, God, give me the number through Julie. And he did. He gave it to you, the exact same thing. And sometimes, though, it's this one thought that you can't get out of your head, or it's these 3 points of light that just seem to line up randomly. And you're like, and that's when you need to start listening. That's when you need to start kind of going, okay, God, what are you telling me?
Yep.
All right. So do we want to jump into the next portion, Judges 7, or how do you want to do this? We do have time.
Let's kind of cover the idea of he goes in. God tells him to reduce the number. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, he starts with 32,000 people. 22,000 go home. They left him only 10,000.
The people, whoever's afraid or timid, go home, and it only left him with 10,000. Then he tells them, take them down to the water, see how they drink from the river.
Because God says, hey, you still got too many people. And Gideon's like,
you have too many people.
Combat, and I have too many people. Like, what are you talking about?
And only 300 of the men drank from their hands. All the others got down on their knees and drank with their faces in the stream, which I found that so weird. But the deal was the ones who drink, cup the water and drink from their hand, their eyes are ready. They're in a place where they're locked in and ready for the battle. And so that night, the Midian camp was in the valley below Gideon. That night, the Lord said, get up and go down into the Midianite camp, for I have given you victory over them. But if you're afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah. Listen to what the Midianites are saying, and you will be greatly encouraged. Then you will be eager to attack. So they went down to the edge of the camp, and they crept up, just as the man was telling his friend about a dream. He said, I had a dream where a loaf of barley bread came tumbling down into the camp. It hit a tent and turned it over and knocked it flat. His companion answered, your dream can only mean one thing. God has given Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite, victory over Midian and all its Israelites. So Gideon heard the dream. Oh, allies, I'm sorry. His dream and the interpretation. He bowed to worship before God and returned to the camp and shouted, get up. For the Lord has given you victory over the Midianite hordes. So he divided the men into 3 groups, the 300 men, 3 groups, gave each man a ram's horn and a clay jar with the torch in it. Now, I just want to pause and say, once again, God didn't, he understood or made a provision for the frailty of man, understanding. He was patient with the timidness that he might have. And he said, hey, because he says, hey, if you're timid, I want you to go down and listen.
Yeah.
He gives him courage. He's an understanding God who understands our frailty. He understands our weakness and goes, listen, if you'll just be eager and you'll just be willing, I'll promise you along the way, I will affirm you. I will confirm what I've called you to do. And so he confirms it in that moment. And so anyway, Gideon
you're
goes
right.
back.
He absolutely did. And there's nothing conventional about what God's doing here in this preparation for the battle, right? He reduces the numbers. He says, hey, Gideon, I want you to sneak up, you and one other guy, the leader, by the way. I want you to sneak up and just listen to what they're talking about. Mm-hmm. And then he gives the enemy camp a dream that I love. That's my favorite part of that thing. He's like, your dream can only mean one thing.
The enemy yes. saying this. It's so great.
Yeah. And so, yeah, you're right. So keep going.
Well, so he splits them. And I find this is a very great tactic, military tactic that he gives here. He divides them the 300 men into 3 groups and gives them a ram's horn and a clay jar with a torch in it. He says, keep your eyes on me when I come to the edge of the camp, do just as I do. And as soon as I and those with me blow the ram's horns, blow your horns too, all around the entire camp, and shout for the Lord and for Gideon. It was just after midnight, after the change of the guard, when Gideon and the 100 men went to the edge of the camp. Suddenly they blew the ram's horn and broke their clay jars. Then all 3 groups blew their horns and broke their jars. They held the blazing torches in their left and the horns in their right, and they all shouted a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. So just a very, very strategic military move there that we're still using today. We use ram's horns and clay jars, and just,
he didn't say go get your sword. He said go get the pottery and a flashlight.
Yes.
Man.
But I love it because God didn't give him something that he could do to win the victory on his own. In other words, there's nothing about this plan that Gideon could have walked away and said, man, I'm a pretty good military leader. Our strategy was flawless and our fighting was perfect. And, we were so strategic in it. No, he gave him something that was obvious that, hey, this is the dumbest thing.
Yeah. Well, think about what the angel. Think about what the angel of the Lord said to him, and this is back in Judges 6. And we talked about it a little bit. It was to go with the strength that you have. I'm going to rescue from the Midianites. But then he also says, I'm going to be with you and will destroy the Midianites as if you were fighting against one man. And legit, that's exactly what happened. Because they blow these ram's horns, they unveil the thing, they yell the a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. And the camp, they just stood where they're at. They did nothing. They just stood and they watched as the Midianites rushed around in panic, shouting as they ran to escape. And essentially, they didn't have to do anything. Yeah. Because they began to fight against each other in the camp. Because there was confusion, a great deal of confusion. They just killed each other for the most part. And then as the ones who did flee, they actually caught them captured them as they're crossing the river. And so the Lord made good on what he told him, which was, hey, you don't go fight them, go with the strength that you have. I'm going to make it like you're fighting one dude. And that's exactly what he did. So it's kind of interesting how the Lord brings that to closure. If you were to kind of wrap this up or put the bow on this.
So just so you know, he goes on to capture people and kill people along the way because he's supposed to. But then in verse 22 of Judges 8, or I guess it starts in 22. He goes on to make an ephod. He wasn't supposed to, but he does it. He made a sacred ephod, verse 27, from the gold that they took and put it in Ophrah, his hometown. But soon all the Israelites prostituted themselves by worshiping it, and it became a trap for Gideon and his family. Here's why I say that.
No, that's good. This is good.
He started so well. What happened? Pride crept in, and it became his downfall. Right after his victory, he became pretty convinced that he had the answers. He went from the guy of saying, "Who am I? I'm the weakest. I'm nobody," to the guy of going, "Man, we've conquered, we captured. Now let's build this ephod to remember our victory." And it just highlights, I believe, the importance of humility. And
do you think you would have? Do you think one of it, like the I don't know, the foreshadowing of the failure here was over in actually back in chapter 7 when he said, "Hey, I want you to shout for the Lord and for Gideon."
Yeah, I think I wonder
That
if,
part has always kind of made me like stopping, like, why for Gideon? Why not just for the Lord?
yeah,
Like, I don't
yeah,
understand.
yeah.
And maybe that
I
was
wonder if
the
that's not part
foreshadowing.
of it. Yeah, it might have crept in there, right?
Yeah,
And Robert, it just makes me think of some incredibly godly people who get to a place in their life where you look up and go, "How did they fall? How did they make that decision? How did they get there?" I actually was just having this conversation with someone the other day, and I told him, "Look, it wasn't overnight. It was one
yeah.
compromise at a time. It was one neglecting of the Holy Spirit at a time. It was one little step at a time. And over time, they looked back and they went from where they once were to a place they never thought they would be, making a poor decision. And I feel like the same is here. You see, it's a picture of Gideon. He's listed as a man of faith. Why? Because he was willing to do what God called him to do, what God told him to do, because God uses the unlikely. He asks for obedience. Oh, he cares about obedience over ability, and he provides confirmation and courage and strength we need along the way. However, we must remain humble, or we will walk into a place where we begin to take credit for what God and God alone has done, and it really puts us in a place to be just overcome by the enemy.
No, I agree. I think it's one of
Oh,
these
and Robert,
times. Yeah, go.
it doesn't just affect you; it affected his family, right? It's not just a choice that affects you; it affects those that you lead as well.
Yeah, it was actually a trap for he and his family.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, as we're kind of looking at the man of Gideon here, right? He starts with learning who God calls him, and I think that's something we talk about a lot. And I think as you're listening to the Lord, there's a lot of ways to sit down and say, Lord, what do you call me? What is it that is your name for me?
Yeah.
And we need to listen to that. And then as we begin to live in that name, God's going to make you successful. He does make you successful. He's going to level you up. That's what happens,
Yeah.
right? That's what happened
Yeah.
with Gideon.
Yeah.
And then Gideon got leveled up and he's up at the top of his game. And instead of just saying, "Hey, shout for the Lord," he says, "Shout for the Lord and for Gideon."
Yeah.
And that's where I think for us, we have to be watchful or thoughtful of not departing from what God's calling us, who we are,
That's
not to
right.
believe that we're something different. Because I think then we all of a sudden, it's not what God calls us, it's what I call me.
Yeah.
And that's, I
Yeah.
think, where folks get off the rails. And then you get into the end and then it becomes a trap and nobody knows how to get out because you're living this false self. And you just need to sit down and be truthful with the Lord so that you don't end up like the wicked and end up like the sin. And this is really where you see Gideon. And so I think if you're listening right now and you're kind of like, okay, Gideon, I get it, pretty cool. How does this apply to me? I think there's 3 phases of Gideon's problem that we need to pay attention to. 1, what does God call you? All right.
Yeah.
2, when He levels you up, do you think it's you or do you think it's God? Who are you giving credit to? And then 3, and most importantly 3, is how do you remain humble before the Lord so that wisdom that He gave you and that strength that He empowered you with, that He clothed you with, so that is not stripped away from you and you fall into this really weird position of people looking back at you and going, how did that happen? Like, whatever happened there? So that you have this opportunity to finish strong. If you're going to wrap this up tonight, I think this is probably the best place to pull it to a close.
Hey, if you want to just learn from Gideon, it goes back to what you said: know who you are. But I would also say know who you're not.
Yeah.
Don't believe that you're God, or and you wouldn't say it that way, but don't put yourself in a place of thinking that you don't need God or that God's not the reason for your success. Apart from Him, I can do nothing.
Absolutely. Amen.
Thank you for taking time to join us today. Our prayer is that you are encouraged in your own journey as you let faith transform the way you live. If you enjoyed hanging with us today, let us know by leaving us a 5-star review and sharing our podcast with others. We look forward to discussing what God is doing in our lives in our next episode.